For 6 years, the boy touched his ear. Every specialist across 3 continents said the same thing. Impossible to fix. His father, a Korean Mafia boss whose tattoos told stories written in blood and whose cream-colored hair was the last thing his enemies saw, spent billions. He could make politicians disappear. He owned half of Seoul's underground. But he couldn't make his son hear. Then a South African housekeeper named Clara saw something 47 doctors had missed. What she pulled out of that child's ear in a mansion outside Seoul will leave you speechless. But here's the thing, it was alive. And what she did next, without permission, without backup, could have gotten her killed. Park Jin-woo was not a good man. Let's establish that right now. The dragon and tiger tattooed across his muscular chest weren't art. They were a resume written in ink and violence. Each scale represented territory conquered. Each drop of blood, a rival eliminated. His cream-colored hair, perfectly styled even at 3 a.m., was legendary in Seoul's underworld. When you saw that hair moving through a crowd, you looked away. You prayed he wasn't coming for you. Jin-woo controlled everything that mattered in Seoul's shadows. The gambling dens in Gangnam, where businessmen lost their companies in a single night. The loan operations that turned desperate people into lifelong slaves. The clubs where politicians' secrets became Jin-woo's leverage. He had prosecutors on his payroll, judges in his pocket, and enough dirt on government officials to collapse the entire system if he wanted. Money? He made more in a week than most people saw in 10 lifetimes. Power? He could end a life with a text message. But there was one thing Park Jin-woo couldn't control. His son's silence. Min-jun was 6 years old. Born deaf. Never heard his first cry. Never heard his mother's voice before cancer took her 3 years ago. Never heard his father say, "I love you." In the rare moments Jin-woo's heart cracked open enough to feel something human. The boy lived in absolute silence, and it was destroying his father. Not because Jin-woo was sentimental. Sentiment was weakness in his world. But because Min-jun was his legacy, his heir, his only connection to the one woman he'd ever actually loved. So Jin-woo did what he always did when faced with an obstacle. He threw money at it until it broke. Mountains of money. Oceans of it. He flew Min-jun to Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. The specialists ran tests for 3 weeks straight. Nothing. He paid $2 million for a consultation with a Swedish doctor who'd restored hearing to a Saudi prince. The man examined Min-jun for 6 hours, then shook his head. Congenital nerve damage. Irreversible. Jin-woo put a gun to that doctor's head and made him look again. Same answer. Tokyo, Beijing, Mumbai, London, Geneva, 12 countries, 47 specialists, 6 billion won spent. Enough money to fund a small nation's healthcare for a year. Every single one said the same thing. Your son will never hear. Accept it. Learn sign language. Move forward. Accept it. Those words made Jin-woo's blood boil. Park Jin-woo didn't accept anything. He built an empire by refusing to accept reality, by bending the world to his will through violence and fear and limitless cash. But this he couldn't buy. This he couldn't threaten. This he couldn't kill his way out of. What Jin-woo didn't know, what his billions and his power and his army of specialists couldn't see, was that the answer wasn't in another country. It wasn't in another hospital. It was about to walk through his front gate with a worn suitcase, a desperate need for money, and a grandmother dying 8,000 kilometers away in Cape Town. Stop right there. Before I tell you what happens next, I need you to do something. Hit that subscribe button right now. I'm serious. What Clara does in the next part of this story is the kind of moment that changes everything. The kind of decision that separates people who watch life happen from people who make life happen. So subscribe, smash that like button, and drop a comment telling me what country you're watching from. I want to know how far this story is reaching. Now let's get back to Clara, because she just arrived at the Park estate, and she has no idea what she's walking into. Clara Botha stood at the gate of the park compound on a gray October morning. her heart hammering against her ribs. The walls were higher than she'd imagined. 3 meters at least, topped with cameras that swiveled slowly, tracking everything. Guards in black suits stood at the entrance, earpieces in, guns visible beneath their jackets. Actual guns. This wasn't a home. This was a military installation disguised as one. Clara's hands trembled as she clutched her bag. She'd flown 8,000 kilometers for this job. Left Cape Town 3 days ago with everything she owned stuffed into one suitcase and a heart full of desperation. The ad had been specific. Housekeeper needed for private estate. International candidates welcome. Must be discreet. Background check required. Salary, $8,000,001 per month. $8,000,001. Clara had converted it 3 times to make sure she hadn't misread. That was 120,000 rand. More money than she'd ever seen in her life. More than she'd made in a year working 3 jobs in Cape Town. It was enough to pay for her grandmother's cancer treatment. Enough to buy time. Time Gogo didn't have. Stage 4 lung cancer. The doctor in Cape Town had said it with the clinical detachment of someone who delivered death sentences every day. 3 months without treatment. Maybe 6 with aggressive chemotherapy and radiation. But the cost. He'd trailed off, letting the silence do the work. 2 million rand. Money that might as well have been 2 billion. Money Clara would never have. So she'd held Gogo's hand. The same hand that had raised her after her parents died in a taxi accident when Clara was 9. The same hand that had worked itself raw cleaning white people's houses in Constantia so Clara could go to school. The same hand that had wiped Clara's tears every time the world reminded her she was poor and black and invisible. "I'll find a way, Gogo," Clara had promised. "I'll find the money. You just hold on." Gogo had smiled, her face gray with pain. "You don't have to save me, Clara. You just have to live." But Clara couldn't accept that. Wouldn't. So when she'd seen the ad on an international job board, desperate, suspicious, probably dangerous, she'd applied anyway. She'd lied on her application, stretched the truth about her experience, borrowed money she didn't have for the plane ticket. And now she was here, standing outside a Korean crime lord's compound, about to lie her way into a job that might get her killed. The gate opened. A woman emerged, 50s, severe face, black suit so crisp it could cut glass. Her eyes scanned Clara like a machine processing data, cataloging every detail. The cheap shoes, the worn coat, the nervousness Clara was trying desperately to hide. "Clara Bota?" The woman's English was perfect, cold. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Mrs. Kong, head of household staff. You will address me as such at all times. You will not address Mr. Park unless he speaks to you first. You will not ask questions about Mr. Park's business. You will not gossip with other staff. You will not enter the East Wing without explicit permission." Mrs. Kang's voice could freeze water. The last foreign housekeeper forgot these rules. She is no longer with us. Clara's stomach dropped. What happened to her? Mrs. Kang's expression didn't change. She asked too many questions. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Clara forced herself to nod. "I understand, Mrs. Kong. Do you?" Mrs. Kong stepped closer. Clara could smell her perfume. Expensive, sharp. "Because I don't think you do. This isn't a normal household, Miss Bota. Mr. Park is not a normal employer. The people who work here follow rules, or they disappear. It's very simple." Clara kept her face neutral even as fear crawled up her spine. She thought about Gogo in that hospital bed in Cape Town, tubes in her arms, pain in her eyes. She thought about the doctor's words, 3 months. She thought about the 120,000 rand per month that could buy Gogo time, buy her a chance. "I'm not here to cause trouble, Mrs. Kong. I'm here to work." Mrs. Kong studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. Follow me." They walked through the compound, and with each step, Clara felt like she was descending into something she didn't fully understand. The Park estate was massive, traditional Korean architecture mixed with modern security. Beautiful curved roofs and wooden beams hiding cameras, sensors, reinforced doors with keypads. Guards everywhere, positioned at perfect intervals, eyes constantly moving. The other servants moved like ghosts. They didn't speak, didn't make eye contact, barely seemed to breathe. Clara watched a young woman carrying linens practically flatten herself against the wall when footsteps approached from around a corner. This wasn't service. This was survival. You'll clean the main house, the guest quarters, and the common areas, Mrs. Kong explained as they walked. You'll start at 5 a.m. every day. You'll finish when your work is finished, not before. You'll eat with the other staff in the kitchen. You'll sleep in the servants' quarters. You'll have 1 day off per month. Clara nodded, committing everything to memory. They passed through a garden, and that's when she saw him. A small boy sat alone by a koi pond. 6 years old, maybe 7. Beautiful child, delicate Korean features, dark hair falling across his forehead, expensive clothes that hung on him like he was disappearing inside them. But it was his posture that broke Clara's heart. He sat perfectly still except for his hands, which were arranging small stones in a precise circle. There was a loneliness around him so thick it seemed to radiate like cold air. As Clara watched, the boy reached up and touched his right ear. Just briefly, a wince crossed his face, quick but unmistakable. Then his hand dropped, and he returned to his stones, lost in his own world. Clara's breath caught. She knew that gesture, had seen it before on her younger brother back in Cape Town. He'd done the same thing for weeks before they'd finally discovered the truth. An insect had crawled into his ear while he slept and died there. The infection that followed had nearly killed him. Clara had been the one to notice, the one who'd insisted something was wrong even when the adults said he was fine. "That's Min Jun," Mrs. Kong said, her voice softening just slightly, the first crack in her armor. "Mr. Park's son. He's deaf. You are never to interact with him. His care team handles everything. Tutors, therapists, specialists. You clean around him, never speak to him, never touch him, never even make eye contact unless he initiates it. Am I absolutely clear?" "Yes, ma'am." But Clara was lying, because she'd seen that wince. She'd seen the way Min Jun touched his ear, and she'd seen what happened when people ignored those signs. Mrs. Kong led her to a small room in the servants' quarters. Plain bed, small closet, one window that looked out at a concrete wall. "Your uniform is in the closet. Report to the kitchen at 5 a.m. tomorrow. Do not be late. Do not make mistakes. And most importantly," she turned, fixing Clara with a look that could stop hearts, "do not make Mr. Park notice you. The best housekeepers are the ones he never sees. The ones he never has to think about. Invisible. That's what you need to be." After Mrs. Kong left, Clara sat on the bed and pulled out her phone. The international plan was costing her money she didn't have, but she needed to hear Gogo's voice. The call went to voicemail. Clara's chest tightened. She tried the hospital instead. "Grutshire Hospital. How can I direct your call?" "I'm calling about Miriam Bota. She's in oncology. I'm her granddaughter." A pause. Keyboard clicking. "Hold please." 2 minutes of tinny hold music. Then, "Miss Bota, your grandmother is stable, but she's been asking for you. Are you able to visit?" Cape Town was 8,000 kilometers away. "I'm working overseas. Can you tell her I'll call tomorrow? Tell her I got the job. Tell her everything's going to be okay." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The bed was comfortable, more comfortable than anything she'd had in Cape Town. But her mind wouldn't stop. She kept seeing Min Jun's face. That wince of pain, the way he'd touched his ear, the loneliness that surrounded him like a cage. She thought about her brother, about the insect that had crawled into his ear and the infection that had followed. She thought about how close they'd come to losing him because adults kept saying, "It's nothing, and he's fine." She thought about all the times she'd promised herself she'd never ignore a child in pain again. Never stand by and do nothing because it wasn't her place or wasn't her problem. But this was different. This wasn't her family in Cape Town. This was a crime lord's son and soul, surrounded by bodyguards and specialists and people far more qualified than her. What could she possibly do that 47 doctors hadn't already tried? "It's not your problem," she told herself. You're here for the money. 120,000 rand a month. That's 4 months of treatment for Gogo. That's all that matters. Keep your head down. Stay invisible. Do your job. But sleep wouldn't come, and Min Jun's face wouldn't leave her mind. Clara started work the next morning at 4:55 a.m. The house was already alive, servants preparing breakfast, guards changing shifts, the machinery of wealth and power grinding forward like it did every day. Clara kept her head down, followed her instructions exactly, cleaned what she was told to clean. Invisible, obedient, exactly what Mrs. Kong wanted. But every time she passed the East Wing, she looked for Min Jun, and every time she saw him, her heart broke a little more. The boy spent his days alone. Tutors came and went, teaching him Korean Sign Language and lip reading. Therapists worked with him on adjustment strategies, fancy clinical words for learning to live in a world that wasn't built for him. But no one played with him. No one laughed with him. No one seemed to see him as anything more than a very expensive problem to be managed. And he kept touching that ear. Over and over. The wince was getting worse, Clara noticed. More frequent. Lasting longer. Sometimes Min Jun would press both hands against his head, his small face scrunching in pain that no one else seemed to notice or care about. On her 5th day, Clara was cleaning the hallway near the garden when she saw Min Jun sitting by the koi pond, both hands pressed against his right ear, tears streaming silently down his face. His small body was shaking. The pain was clearly unbearable. Clara looked around. No tutors. No therapists. No guards watching this particular corner of the garden. Min Jun was completely alone in his agony. Every rule Mrs. Kong had given her echoed in Clara's head. Don't interact with him. Don't touch him. Stay invisible. She thought about her job, about the money, about Gogo lying in that hospital bed in Cape Town waiting for treatment that Clara's salary would provide. Then she thought about her brother, writhing in pain while adults ignored him, about the promises she'd made to herself, about the kind of person she wanted to be. Clara made a decision. She dropped her cleaning supplies and walked quickly toward Min Jun. The boy didn't see her approach. His eyes were squeezed shut, his hands pressed hard against his ear. Clara knelt in front of him and gently touched his shoulder. His eyes flew open. Fear flickered across his face. He wasn't used to people touching him without warning. Clara held up both hands in what she hoped was a universal gesture of peace. Then she pointed to his ear and made a questioning expression. Min Jun hesitated, then nodded. More tears fell. Clara pointed to herself, then made a gesture of looking, examining. Can I see? Min Jun stared at her for a long moment. This strange foreign woman he'd seen cleaning the house. This person who wasn't part of his care team, wasn't one of the doctors who'd poked and prodded him his whole life. But there was something in Clara's eyes, something kind, something that said, I see your pain and I believe you, that made him trust her. He nodded and tilted his head toward her. Clara's hands were shaking. She gently brushed his hair back and leaned close, angling his head toward the afternoon sunlight. She could see into his ear canal, and what she saw made her blood run cold. There was something there, something dark, something with legs. It was an insect, dead, lodged deep in his ear canal. From the discoloration around it, Clara could tell it had been there for a long time. Weeks, maybe months, long enough for the tissue around it to become inflamed and infected, long enough to cause the kind of pain that would make a child cry silent tears. Clara's mind raced. This wasn't something she could ignore. This wasn't something she could wait for doctors to discover. They'd had 6 years and they'd missed it. If she left this insect in Min Jun's ear, the infection would get worse. It could spread to his inner ear, to his brain. Her brother had almost died from exactly this. But if she tried to remove it and failed, if she hurt Min Jun, if she made things worse, Jin Woo would kill her. Not metaphorically, actually kill her. Mrs. Kong had made that crystal clear. Clara looked at Min Jun's face, at the pain written in every line, at the tears that wouldn't stop falling. She thought about Gogo, about the treatment she needed, about the job Clara would lose if she did this. Then she thought about her brother's face when they'd finally removed the insect from his ear and he'd stopped crying for the first time in weeks. Clara made her choice. She pulled out her phone and opened the translation app. She typed quickly, then showed Min Jun the screen. There's something in your ear. Something that doesn't belong. I can take it out, but you have to stay very still. Can you be brave? Min Jun read the message, his eyes going wide. He looked at Clara, then at his ear, then back at Clara. He nodded. Clara looked around one more time. Still no one watching. She had maybe 5 minutes before someone came to check on Min Jun. Maybe less. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small sewing kit she always carried. A habit from growing up poor, when you fix things instead of replacing them. Inside was a pair of small, sharp tweezers she used for removing splinters. Clara sterilized the tweezers with hand sanitizer. Not ideal, but it was all she had. She knelt in front of Min Jun and held up one finger. Wait. Then she typed another message. This will feel strange. If it hurts too much, you push my hand away. Okay. Min Jun nodded, but his small hand found Clara's free hand and gripped it tight. He was terrified, but he trusted her. Clara positioned herself, tilted Min Jun's head to catch the best light. She could see the insect clearly now, some kind of beetle, its hard shell wedged deep in the ear canal. The tissue around it was red, inflamed, infected. This had been causing him agony. Please, God, Clara whispered in Kosa, the language of her childhood. Guide my hands. Protect this child. She inserted the tweezers slowly, carefully. Min Jun flinched, but didn't pull away. His hand squeezed Clara's so hard it hurt, but she kept her own hand steady. The tweezers touched the insect's shell. Hard, slippery, wedged tight. Clara hooked the beetle carefully, tested the resistance. It was lodged in there, stuck fast. She'd have to pull firmly but smoothly. Any jerking motion could push it deeper or tear the inflamed tissue. She took a breath and pulled. The beetle moved slightly. Min Jun made a sound, a whimper that turned into a gasp. Tears poured down his face, but he held still, his entire body trembling with the effort. Almost there, baby, Clara whispered, knowing he couldn't hear her, but hoping somehow he could feel the intention. Just a little more. She adjusted her grip and pulled again, steady and firm. She felt it give, the beetle sliding free from where it had been embedded. One more pull, gentle but insistent, and suddenly it came loose. The beetle fell into Clara's palm. Dead, dark, its legs curled up. Disgusting, but out. Min Jun gasped again, a huge, shuddering breath. His hand released Clara's. He touched his ear, gently at first, then more firmly. His eyes went impossibly wide. And then Clara saw it happen. Min Jun's whole body went rigid. He pressed his hand against his ear, then pulled it away. Pressed it again. His mouth opened in shock. He could hear something. The pressure was gone, the blockage removed, and sound was flooding in. Not clear, not perfect. His ear canal was still inflamed and infected. He'd need antibiotics and proper medical care. But some sound was getting through. After 6 years of absolute silence, Min Jun was hearing something. He looked at Clara with an expression of pure wonder. His mouth moved, trying to form words he'd never heard himself speak. A sound came out, rough, uncertain, but real. Ah. He was hearing his own voice for the first time. Clara's tears fell freely now. She held up the beetle, showed it to Min Jun. His eyes went huge. She typed quickly on her phone, "This was in your ear. This is why it hurt. This is why you couldn't hear." Min Jun stared at the insect, then at Clara, then back at the beetle. He reached out and touched Clara's face with both hands, the way you touch something precious, something you're afraid might disappear. And that's when Clara heard it. Footsteps. Fast. Heavy. Coming from the house. She turned, and her heart stopped. Park Jinwoo stood in the doorway leading to the garden, frozen mid-step. He'd been coming to check on his son, a rare moment when his schedule allowed it. He was still wearing his suit jacket, his cream-colored hair perfect, his expression that controlled mask he always wore. But that mask was cracking. Because he was staring at his son, at the tears on Min-jun's face, at the foreign housekeeper kneeling in front of him with something dark in her palm, at the tweezers in her other hand. Jinwoo's eyes went from Clara to Min-jun to the beetle in her hand. Clara watched his face change, confusion, then anger, then something else. Fear. Because his son was making sounds. Actual sounds. What? Jinwoo's voice came out strangled. What did you do? Clara stood slowly, her legs shaking. She held out her palm, showing him the beetle. Mr. Park, I can explain. What did you do? Each word was a bullet. Min-jun turned toward his father's voice. His eyes went wide. He was hearing it. Distorted, painful probably, but he was hearing his father speak. He reached toward Jinwoo and made a sound. Pop. Jinwoo's face went white. He stumbled forward, nearly falling, and dropped to his knees in front of his son. Min-jun, can you? Min-jun touched his father's face, then his own throat, feeling the vibrations. Appa, he said again, clearer this time. Father. Jinwoo's hands were shaking as he cupped his son's face. You can hear me? Can you hear me? Min-jun nodded, tears streaming down his face. He pointed to his ear, then to Clara, then made a gesture of pulling something out. Jinwoo turned to look at Clara. She was still holding the beetle, her hand outstretched like evidence at a trial. For a moment, no one moved. The entire world seemed to hold its breath. Then Jinwoo stood and walked toward Clara. Each step was measured, controlled, terrifying. When he reached her, he looked down at her palm, at the dead insect, at the inflammation on its legs that showed how long it had been embedded in his son's ear. How long have you known? His voice was deadly quiet. 5 days, sir, since I arrived. But I only saw what it was today, when the light was right and he was in enough pain that I could see deep into his ear canal. 5 days. Jinwoo's jaw clenched. You saw something in 5 days that 47 specialists missed in 6 years. They weren't looking for it, sir. They were looking for genetic problems, nerve damage, complicated medical conditions. This was simple. An insect that crawled into his ear, probably when he was a baby. It died there. The inflammation and swelling blocked his hearing completely. The infection has been causing him pain for who knows how long. Jinwoo stared at the beetle. Clara could see his mind working, could see the rage building. They saw this. Somewhere in all those scans, someone saw this and dismissed it, or ignored it, or didn't think it mattered enough to investigate. Mr. Park, what matters is that Min-jun. What matters, Jinwoo interrupted, his voice like ice, is that my son has been in agony for years. What matters is that I spent 6 billion won on specialists who couldn't be bothered to actually look at him. What matters is that a housekeeper from South Africa did in 5 days what an army of doctors couldn't do in 6 years. He turned back to Min-jun, who was sitting on the ground, touching his ear over and over, overwhelmed by the sensation of hearing. Jinwoo knelt beside his son and signed something in KSL. Min-jun signed back, then pointed to Clara. Jinwoo's expression shifted. He signed again, more urgently. Min-jun responded, his hands moving quickly, and then he made a sound, a laugh. Rough, unpracticed, but a laugh. Jinwoo stood again, and when he looked at Clara this time, his eyes were wet. My son says you're the first person who believed him when he said it hurt. 6 years of therapists and doctors and specialists, and every one of them told him it was phantom pain or psychological. You're the first person who looked at him and saw the truth. Clara's legs were shaking so badly she thought she might collapse. Sir, I broke your rules. I touched your son without permission. I performed a medical procedure without training. I know what Mrs. Kong said about people who overstep, and I understand if you need to. Stop. Jinwoo held up a hand. He walked closer, close enough that Clara could see the dragon tattoo peeking out from his collar, close enough to be terrifying. You broke every rule in this house. You risked your job. You risked your life. Because make no mistake, If you'd heard him, I would have killed you." Clara nodded, unable to speak. "But you didn't hurt him. You saved him." Jean Wu's voice cracked. "You gave my son his hearing back. You ended 6 years of pain that I couldn't end, that all my money and power couldn't end. You did what 47 specialists couldn't do, and you did it knowing it could cost you everything." He pulled out his phone and made a call, barking orders in Korean. Clara caught enough to understand. "Doctor, now, emergency, antibiotics, infection." Then Jean Wu turned back to her. "My son needs proper medical treatment. That ear is infected, but because of you, he'll get that treatment. Because of you, he can hear. Because of you." He stopped, overcome. Min Jun ran over and wrapped his arms around Clara's legs, burying his face against her. He was making sounds, not words yet, just sounds, testing his voice, feeling the vibrations, overwhelmed and joyful and terrified all at once. Clara knelt down and hugged him back. "You're so brave," she whispered in English, knowing he probably couldn't understand but hoping he could feel it. "So brave." Mrs. Kong appeared in the doorway, her face a mask of professional concern. "Mr. Park, the doctor is on his way." She stopped when she saw Clara kneeling with Min Jun, saw the tears on everyone's faces, saw the insect still in Clara's palm. "What happened?" Jean Wu's voice was steel. "Miss Bota just accomplished what 6 years of specialists couldn't. She found out why my son couldn't hear, and she fixed it." Mrs. Kang's eyes went to the beetle, then to Min Jun, who was making sounds, testing his voice. Her professional mask cracked. Is he hearing?" "Yes." Jean Wu's voice was thick with emotion. "Not perfectly, not clearly yet, but yes, my son can hear." Over the next hour, the house exploded into controlled chaos. A doctor arrived, not just any doctor, but the head of otolaryngology from Seoul National University Hospital, pulled from his dinner and brought to the Park estate by 3 of Jean Wu's men. He examined Min Jun's ear with increasing astonishment. "There's significant inflammation and a mild infection, but nothing that antibiotics can't handle," the doctor said, his hands shaking slightly as he wrote prescriptions. "The foreign object has been removed cleanly. Whoever did this had steady hands. Very steady. If this had been left much longer, the infection could have spread to the inner ear, potentially to the brain. This child was in serious danger." Jean Wu's jaw tightened. And yet 47 specialists examined him over 6 years and found nothing. The doctor looked uncomfortable. Sometimes in medicine, we become so focused on complex diagnoses that we miss simple explanations. It's a failure of our training, our systems. "It's a failure of you specifically," Jean Wu said quietly, "because you were one of those 47 specialists. You examined my son 3 years ago. You ran tests. You wrote a report that said his condition was irreversible congenital nerve damage. You charged me 2 million won for that opinion." The doctor's face went gray. "Get out," Jean Wu said. "Leave the prescriptions. Send your bill. And pray I don't look too closely at your records, because if I find out you saw evidence of this and dismissed it, if I find out you prioritized billing me over helping my son, you'll wish you'd chosen a different profession." The doctor practically ran from the house. Clara stood in the corner, trying to be invisible again. But Jean Wu turned to her. "Not you. You stay." After the doctor left, Jean Wu sat with Min Jun, who was curled up on the sofa, exhausted from the overwhelming day. The boy was already falling asleep, one hand tucked under his cheek, the other touching his ear as if to make sure the pain was really gone. Jean Wu looked at that small hand, and something in his expression broke. He turned to Clara. "How did you know? How did you see what everyone else missed?" Clara chose her words carefully. "My younger brother, sir. When I was 14, an insect crawled into his ear while he slept. We were too poor for doctors, so my mother kept saying he was fine, it would pass. But I saw him wince. I saw him touch his ear, and I knew something was wrong. By the time we got him to a clinic, the infection was bad. They removed a beetle. They said if we'd waited another week, he might have died. Jinwoo nodded slowly. So when you saw my son touching his ear, I saw my brother. I saw the signs everyone else was ignoring. And I couldn't. Clara's voice broke. I couldn't watch another child suffer when I knew what was wrong. Even if it cost me this job. Even if it meant going home to Cape Town with nothing. I couldn't walk away from a child in pain. Jinwoo was quiet for a long time. Then, your grandmother. Mrs. Kong mentioned she's ill. Clara's stomach dropped. Yes, sir. Cancer. She needs treatment I can't afford. That's why I took this job. How much does the treatment cost? 2 million rand, sir. About 300 million won. It's more than I'll ever have. Jinwoo pulled out his phone and made a call. He spoke in Korean, rapid-fire instructions. Then he hung up and looked at Clara. It's done, Jinwoo said simply. The money has been wired to Grootscher Hospital in Cape Town. 300 million won. Enough for your grandmother's treatment and whatever else she needs. The hospital will contact you within the hour to confirm. Clara's legs gave out. She stumbled backward, catching herself against the wall. Sir, I can't. That's too much. It's nothing. Jinwoo's voice was firm. You gave me my son back. You ended 6 years of pain, 6 years of guilt, 6 years of watching him suffer, while specialists told me to accept it. 300 million won. He looked at Min Jun sleeping peacefully for the first time in who knew how long. I'd have paid 3 billion. 30 billion. Whatever it took. Clara's hands were shaking. She pressed them against her face, trying to hold back the tears, but they came anyway. Huge, gasping sobs that she couldn't control. Gogo was going to live. Gogo was going to get treatment. The weight she'd been carrying for months, the impossible choice between staying in Cape Town to watch her grandmother die, or leaving to make money she'd never earned fast enough. Jinwoo's expression had shifted into something calculating, businesslike. Thank you. The crime lord sliding back, Jinwoo interrupted. Because I'm not back to being a housekeeper, he said. That would be a waste of your talents. You notice things other people miss. You see problems other people ignore. You act when action is needed, even when it's dangerous. Those are rare qualities. Sir, I don't understand. I'm offering you a different position. Personal assistant to Min Jun. You'll oversee his care team, manage his therapy schedule, coordinate with his doctors. But more importantly, you'll be the person who actually pays attention to him. The person who sees when something's wrong. The person who believes him. Jinwoo's eyes were intense. My son trusted you. In 6 years, he's never trusted anyone outside this family. That's worth more to me than any credential or degree. Clara's mind was spinning. Mr. Park, I'm not qualified. You found what 47 specialists missed. You're more qualified than anyone. He named a salary that made Clara's head spin. 20 million won per month. 4 times what she'd been promised as a housekeeper. Plus housing, health insurance, travel expenses when needed. And your grandmother, once her treatment is complete, if she wants to come to Seoul, I'll arrange it. Private care, whatever she needs. Clara couldn't breathe. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to girls from Khayelitsha, to people who grew up in shacks and wore secondhand clothes and learned to be invisible because visibility meant danger. Why? She whispered. Why would you do all this? Jinwoo looked at his sleeping son. Because you saw him. Not as a problem, not as a disability, not as something broken that needed fixing. You saw a child in pain and you helped him, even though it could have cost you everything. That kind of courage, that kind of compassion, I can't buy it. I can't threaten it into existence. I can only hope to keep it close to my son. He turned back to Clara. But I need to be very clear about something. This isn't a normal job. My life, my business, the things I do, they're not legal. They're not good. People who work for me see things they can't talk about. They keep secrets. They look the other way. Can you do that? Clara thought about Gogo, about the treatment she'd receive, about Min Jun, sleeping peacefully because he wasn't in pain anymore, about the choice between moral purity and survival, a choice she'd never had the privilege of making from a position of security. I can keep my focus on Min Jun, Clara said carefully. I can make sure he's safe and healthy and heard. What happens outside of that? I'll keep to myself." Jinwoo studied her face for a long moment, looking for hesitation, for judgment. But Clara had grown up in a place where you survived by knowing when to see things and when to be blind. She understood the rules of this game, even if the players and stakes were different. "Good," Jinwoo said finally. "You start tomorrow. Mrs. Kong will prepare new quarters for you, something closer to Minjun's room. You'll meet with his current care team and let me know who stays and who goes. Anyone who dismissed his pain, anyone who didn't take him seriously, I want them gone." Clara nodded. "Yes, sir." Jinwoo's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression hardened back into the mask Clara had first seen. Business. The underworld calling. He stood, buttoned his jacket, transformed back into the man whose cream-colored hair meant death in soul shadows. But before he left, he stopped next to Clara. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "My wife died giving birth to Minjun. I've spent 6 years blaming myself for not protecting her, for not saving her. I couldn't save her, but you saved him. You gave me a second chance to be the father I should have been from the beginning. I won't forget that." Then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the hallway, leaving Clara alone with the sleeping child and a future she'd never imagined possible. Clara's phone buzzed. She pulled it out with shaking hands. An email from Grutshire Hospital. "Dear Ms. Bota, we are writing to confirm that full payment has been received for Miriam Bota's cancer treatment protocol. Treatment will begin immediately. Please contact our international patient coordinator at your earliest convenience to discuss care plans and family accommodations. Your grandmother is asking for you. She's crying. She keeps saying, 'My Clara, my Clara.' Would you like us to call you when she's more composed?" Clara pressed the phone to her chest and closed her eyes. "I did it, Go-Go," she whispered. "I found a way. You're going to be okay." She looked at Minjun sleeping peacefully, his small chest rising and falling in a rhythm that looked, for the first time, like actual rest instead of exhausted collapse. This strange, lonely little boy who'd suffered for so long while the adults around him looked everywhere except at the actual problem. Clara walked over and gently brushed his hair back from his forehead. He stirred slightly, smiled in his sleep. Tomorrow his ear would hurt less. The antibiotics would start working. The inflammation would decrease. And slowly, carefully, he'd begin to understand the world of sound he'd been missing. There would be speech therapy, auditory training, so much work ahead. But tonight, he was free from pain. Tonight, he could rest. Mrs. Kong appeared in the doorway, her severe expression softened by something that might have been respect. "Miss Bota, Mr. Park has asked me to prepare new accommodations for you. If you'll follow me." Clara stood, taking one last look at Minjun. Is he going to be okay alone? His night nurse will be here shortly, and Mr. Park has already arranged for round-the-clock monitoring until the infection clears completely. Mrs. Kang's voice was gentle, a tone Clara hadn't heard from her before. "You did a remarkable thing today. A dangerous thing, but remarkable. I just did what anyone would do." "No." Mrs. Kong shook her head. "Most people follow rules. Most people protect themselves first. You protected a child. In this house, that's unusual." They walked through the compound to a different wing. The quarters Mrs. Kong showed Clara were nothing like the small servant's room she'd been given before. This was a proper apartment. Bedroom, sitting room, private bathroom, a small kitchen. Windows that looked out over the garden where she'd first seen Minjun. "This is too much," Clara said. "Mr. Park doesn't do things halfway. You'll find clothing in the closet. We took the liberty of ordering sizes based on your file. Your salary will be deposited monthly, starting tomorrow. You'll have access to a car and driver. And this," Mrs. Kong handed her a black card. "For anything Minjun needs. There's no limit." After Mrs. Kong left, Clara sat on the edge of the bed and called Cape Town. The phone rang twice before Gogo answered, her voice thick with tears. "Clara? Clara? Baby, they said the money came through. They said all of it. They said I can start treatment Monday. How did you? Where did you? I helped someone, Gogo. I helped a little boy who was in pain. And his father was grateful. What did you do? Gogo's voice was sharp. Clara, what kind of trouble did you get yourself into? Clara thought about the beetle in Min Jun's ear, about the specialist who'd missed it, about Jin Woo's face when he heard his son speak. I did what you taught me, Gogo. I saw someone suffering and I helped them, even though it was scary, even though it was risky. Gogo was quiet for a moment. Then, you're a good girl, Clara. Always have been. But you be careful in that place, you hear me? Rich people, powerful people, they're not like us. They'll use you up if you let them. I know, Gogo. But this little boy, he needs someone who sees him. Someone who believes him. I can be that person. Just don't lose yourself doing it. Gogo's voice was fierce. Promise me, whatever happens in that house, whatever you see, you stay who you are. You stay my Clara. I promise. They talked for another hour. Gogo told her about the treatment plan, about the doctors who'd suddenly become available, about the private room she'd been moved to. Clara told her about Min Jun, about the garden, about the job that seemed impossible but was somehow real. After they hung up, Clara stood at the window looking out at the garden. The koi pond was still and dark, reflecting the moon. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow she'd step into a role she wasn't trained for, in a house where violence and wealth mixed like poison and medicine, working for a man who could end lives as easily as he'd saved her grandmother's. But tonight, she'd done something good, something right. She'd ended a child's suffering when everyone else had given up. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to build a future on. Her phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. Miss Bota, this is Dr. Kim from Seoul National University Hospital. Mr. Park has asked me to oversee Min Jun's continued care. I'll be visiting tomorrow at 10 a.m. to examine his ear and adjust his treatment protocol. I'm told I have you to thank for finally discovering the source of his pain. I apologize for missing it during my previous examinations. I hope to learn from your observational skills. Clara stared at the message. A doctor, a specialist, apologizing to her, wanting to learn from her. She typed back, "Thank you, Dr. Kim. I'll have Min Jun ready for your visit." And I wasn't trying to show anyone up. I just saw a child hurting and wanted to help. The response came immediately. That's precisely what makes you qualified to care for him. See you tomorrow. Clara set her phone down and finally allowed herself to feel the weight of the day. The terror when she decided to examine Min Jun's ear. The shock of seeing the beetle. The fear when Jin Woo had appeared in the doorway. The overwhelming relief when Min Jun had spoken, when he'd heard his father's voice. She thought about the other housekeeper, the one Mrs. Kong had warned her about. The one who'd overstepped and disappeared. What had that woman tried to do? Had she seen something wrong and tried to fix it? Had she paid the price for caring too much? Clara would probably never know. But she understood now that working in the Park household meant walking a razor's edge. One side was safety through silence. The other side was risk through action. Most people chose safety. Clara had chosen risk, and somehow, impossibly, it had paid off. But would it always? Would there come a day when her instinct to help would cost her everything? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Clara opened the door to find a young woman holding a tray of food. "Mrs. Kong thought you might be hungry, Miss Bota. You haven't eaten since breakfast." Clara accepted the tray. Rice, soup, banchan, more food than she could possibly eat. "Thank you. What's your name?" The young woman looked surprised by the question. "Ji-won, miss." "Thank you, Ji-won. And please, just call me Clara." Ji-won's eyes widened. "I couldn't possibly." "Sure you can. We're both working here, right? Both taking care of this house." Clara smiled. "No need for the formality when it's just us." Ji-won bowed quickly and left, but Clara caught the small smile on her face. Small acts of kindness. Small moments of seeing people as people. Maybe that's what this house needed most. Clara ate slowly, her mind already turning to tomorrow. Min Jun would wake up without pain for the first time in who knew how long. He'd start antibiotics. The inflammation would decrease. And slowly, carefully, they'd begin the work of teaching him to understand the sounds that were now entering his world. There would be challenges. His brain had developed without auditory input. Rewiring those neural pathways would take time, patience, specialized therapy. He might never hear perfectly, but he would hear something. And more importantly, he would know that someone had finally listened when he said he was hurting. Clara's phone lit up with another message. This one from a South African number she didn't recognize. "Clara, it's your cousin Marcus. Your grandmother told me what happened. I don't know what you did or who you helped, but I know about rich people and favors. Be careful. They'll make you feel special until they don't need you anymore. Then you're disposable. Watch your back." Clara smiled sadly. Marcus meant well, but he didn't understand. She wasn't naive. She knew exactly what kind of man Park Jin-woo was. She knew the danger she'd walked into. But she also knew what it felt like to watch someone you love suffer while the world ignored them. She knew what it meant to be powerless, invisible, dismissed. Min-jun had been all those things, despite his wealth, despite his father's power, despite everything money could buy. He'd been suffering, and no one had truly seen him until Clara arrived. That connection, that understanding of what it meant to be overlooked, that was something money couldn't buy and power couldn't create. That was why Jin-woo had hired her. Not because she was qualified in the traditional sense, but because she'd proven she could see past the obvious to the truth underneath. Clara typed back to Marcus, "I know what I'm doing, and I know the risks. But this little boy needs someone who believes him. I can be that person. Trust me." She finished her meal and prepared for bed, but sleep felt impossible. Her mind kept replaying the moment when the beetle had come free, when Min-jun had gasped, when he'd heard sound for the first time in his memory. The pure wonder on his face. The way he'd touched his throat, feeling his own voice. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The care team would resist her authority. Why should they take orders from an unqualified housekeeper? The specialists would be defensive. She'd made them all look incompetent. Mrs. Kong and the other staff would watch her carefully, looking for signs she was getting too comfortable, overstepping again. But Clara had faced worse. She'd grown up in Khayelitsha, where every day was a test of will and resourcefulness. She'd watched her parents die, raised herself while caring for younger siblings, worked 3 jobs while finishing school. She'd learned to be strong when strength was all she had. This was just another test, another challenge, and she'd face it the same way she'd faced everything else, with courage, compassion, and the stubborn refusal to look away when someone needed help. Clara finally climbed into bed, exhaustion pulling her under. Her last thought before sleep took her was of Min-jun's voice, rough and unpracticed but real. "Appa, Appa, Father." The first word he'd ever spoken. The first word he'd ever heard himself say. Tomorrow, they'd work on the second word, and the third, and slowly, patiently, they'd build a bridge between silence and sound, between suffering and healing. Clara dreamed of home, of Khayelitsha's dusty streets and crowded shacks, of Gogo's laugh, full and rich and alive, of her brother before the infection, running through their neighborhood with other children, his voice high and clear and fearless. In the dream, she was standing in the park garden, but it had transformed. The koi pond had become the small stream near her childhood home where she used to catch tadpoles. The manicured lawns had become the wild grass where she'd played hide and seek. And Min-jun was there, running and laughing, his voice joining a chorus of other children's voices in a language that transcended words. She woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the sound of birds singing. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory flooded back. Seoul, the park estate, Min-jun, the beetle, everything. Clara checked her phone. 6:15 a.m. Messages from Gogo confirming her first treatment appointment. A text from Mrs. Kong detailing the day's schedule. An email from Dr. Kim with questions about Min-jun's symptoms over the past weeks. And one more message from a number labeled only as Park Jin-woo. Min-jun woke up asking for you. He says his ear doesn't hurt anymore. He says he can hear the birds. He says you're magic. Come to breakfast when you're ready. We have much to discuss about his care plan. Clara showered quickly and dressed in the clothes that had been left for her. Simple, professional, appropriate. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The exhausted, desperate woman who'd arrived at the Park estate a week ago was gone. In her place was someone who looked almost confident. She walked through the compound, no longer trying to be invisible. Servants nodded to her respectfully. Guards acknowledged her with small bows. Word had spread quickly. The foreign housekeeper who'd accomplished what the specialists couldn't. The woman Mr. Park had personally elevated to his son's care team. Clara found them in the breakfast room. Jin-woo in his suit, already reviewing documents on his tablet, and Min-jun sitting beside him, eating with one hand while the other touched his ear periodically, like he needed to confirm the pain was really gone. When Min-jun saw Clara, his face lit up. He made a sound, not quite a word, but close. Clara's name, maybe, or an attempt at it. He jumped up and ran to her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Clara knelt down to his level. "Good morning," she said slowly, clearly, knowing he was probably reading her lips as much as hearing her voice. "How do you feel?" Min-jun touched his ear, then gave her a thumbs up. Then he opened his mouth and tried something new. "CLA? Clara?" "Yes." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, that's my name. You said it perfectly." Min-jun beamed. He pointed to his father. "Appa," then to himself. "Min-jun." Then back to Clara. "Clara." 3 words. 3 connections. A family being built from silence and pain and one moment of courage. Jin-woo stood and walked over. "Dr. Kim will be here in 3 hours. After that, we'll discuss Min-jun's therapy schedule, his education plan, and the changes we need to make to his care team. But first, he looked at Clara with an expression she couldn't quite read. "First, we eat. As a family. Because that's what you are now. Whether you intended it or not. When you chose to help my son, you became part of this family. And I protect my family with everything I have." It was both a promise and a warning. Clara understood both. She sat down at the table, Min-jun on one side, Jin-woo on the other, and accepted a bowl of rice from a servant who smiled at her with genuine warmth. Outside, Seoul was waking up. In this house, a new chapter was beginning. Clara thought about Gogo, about to start treatment that would save her life. She thought about her brother, gone too soon because no one had listened. She thought about all the children suffering in silence, waiting for someone to truly see them. And she made a promise to herself. As long as she was here, as long as she had the power to do so, she would look. She would listen. She would believe children when they said they were in pain, even if it cost her everything. Hey, before you click away, I need to tell you something. This story is based on real cases where children suffered for years because adults didn't take their pain seriously. Because doctors looked at scans instead of patients. Because people followed rules instead of trusting their instincts. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that sometimes courage means breaking the rules to do what's right, then do 3 things for me. First, subscribe to this channel. I find stories like this, stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, and I share them because I believe they matter. Second, hit that like button and share this video. Someone in your life needs to hear this story today. Someone needs to be reminded that they have the power to make a difference, even when they feel powerless. Third, drop a comment and tell me, have you ever had to choose between following rules and doing what you knew was right? What did you choose? I read every comment, and your stories inspire me to keep finding and sharing these moments of courage. Clara risked everything for a child she barely knew. Min-jun finally found someone who believed him. And Jin-woo learned that sometimes the answers we're looking for aren't in the places we expect. What will your story be? Who will you choose to see when everyone else is looking away? Thanks for watching. Now go be someone's Clara today.